What if Palpatine forgot which order to execute? We pick up with Palpatine preparing to send out the order that will destroy the Jedi. Let's begin. Sidious savored the moment. Everything had fallen into place perfectly. The Jedi Council had tried to arrest him, Anakin had turned, and Mace Windu lay dead on the Coruscant streets below. Now for the grand finale, Order 66. He activated the floor-mounted holorecorder in his private office, deep within the Chancellor's suite of the executive building. The circular emitter thrummed to life, holographic controls blooming into the air. Translucent panes hovered above the ring as his fingers moved through the interface, configuring broadcast parameters and encryption protocols. This transmission would reach every clone in the galaxy. Afterward, he would use the same device to contact individual commanders directly, ensuring priority targets like Yoda and Kenobi were eliminated. But first came the master recording. The holorecorder's indicator shifted to green. It was recording. He pulled his hood forward to achieve maximum Sith aesthetic. The shadows had to fall just right across his scarred face. Execute order. His mouth remained open, waiting for the number. Nothing. The number that had lived in his consciousness for 2 decades simply wasn't. 16 surfaced. Wrong. 60. Also wrong. His thoughts, normally precise as a surgical droid's incision, swam in confusion. "Fuck," he muttered, killing the recording. His palm struck his temple. Once, twice, as if the memory might be jarred loose through force. His mind had never failed him before. What could have caused this? The only wound he'd suffered was the lightning, his own power hurled back by Windu. It had ruined his face, seared the flesh into ruin. But had it gone deeper? Burned through synapses as well as skin? Impossible. He was Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith, architect of 1,000... The number. What was the number? Panic crept through him. Time was running out. Anakin was already en route to the 501st. Decades of manipulation, thousands of moves and counter-moves, all undone by 2 missing digits. He abandoned the recorder and hurried from his private chambers to the main office. The clone contingency manual, he kept it in the primary desk. His fingers fumbled with the drawer before ripping it open. There, beneath layers of Senate proceedings, all 150 orders in mind-numbing detail. But the pages wouldn't hold still. Letters slid apart, breaking into meaningless fragments. He struck his skull again, harder. Something inside answered with a wet pop, a ringing that started deep and spread outward. He shoved the sensation aside. The order. He needed the order. But the text was useless now, dissolving like water across the page. Still, he knew. There was a 6 in there somewhere. If he couldn't find the right order, he'd give them all. "F*** it," Palpatine snarled, stumbling back to the recorder. He reactivated the recorder, hood drawn, trying to look composed despite the growing pressure behind his eyes. Execute orders 6, 16, 26, 36, 46, 56. His voice droned through the numbers, every combination with a 6 between 1 and 150. He clicked send. The transmission rippled outward in seconds, carried on secure channels to every clone legion. No personal touch for Cody or Bly, no special attention for those near the prime targets. Too much time had already been lost. He collapsed into his chair. The ringing, was it in the air or in his ears? Across the galaxy, clones received the transmission simultaneously. The results were chaotic. Order 6 demanded they throw away all communication equipment immediately. Clones began hurling their comlinks into whatever was nearby. Rivers, trash compactors, starship airlocks. But Order 16 required them to verify the command channel. Hard to do when you'd just thrown your transmitter off a cliff. Order 26. Check weapons. Sure, easy enough. Order 36. Remove helmets and check for imposters. Order 46. Log serial numbers of all issued equipment. Order 56. Report current position and status to command. Again, difficult without comms. Order 60. Conduct full headcount verification. Order 61. Establish defensive perimeter around the Jedi General. Order 62. Write diary entries documenting current mental state. Order 63. Ignore any command not issued by your own general. Assume it's compromised. After that, nothing else in the sequence really mattered. The 212th Attack Battalion on Utapau descended into methodical chaos. The orders had arrived simultaneously, but the clones' behavioral chips processed them sequentially. Throw away comms, verify identities, conduct headcounts, check weapons, establish defensive perimeters, write diary entries. Then their chips hit Order 63, and the battalion froze. Having carried out Orders 6 through 62, Order 63 now blocked everything else. With nothing left to execute, the clones defaulted to idle behavior. Some organized rocks by size, others launched into push-up competitions. Obi-Wan, still lightheaded from whatever that Utapau had slipped into his tea, was far too busy arranging Grievous's severed head for holophotos to notice. When he finally looked up, his troops were stacking a pyramid of discarded helmets. He decided this was probably fine. Meanwhile, in his office, Palpatine's condition was rapidly worsening. He tried to consult the contingency manual again to pinpoint the correct order, but the letters peeled from the parchment and crawled across his hand like insects, wriggling up his fingers before dissolving into nothing. Blood dripped from his nose onto the manual's pages. "What's happening?" he mumbled, tapping his head again. The tapping had become compulsive, automatic. Each impact sent waves of pain through his skull, but he couldn't stop. He rose to stand. The floor rushed up to meet him. Pain exploded through his skull as he struck the marble. When he tried to push himself up, warmth trickled down his neck. He touched it, red, from his ears now. This room? Was it his office? The ceiling seemed wrong. Too far. Too close. Spinning. Why was he on the floor? When had he fallen? Anakin had been waiting for 30 minutes. Palpatine's signal to rally the 501st should have come by now. Instead, he'd watched the Legion drift into bizarre routines after receiving some garbled transmission. He tried the Chancellor's private frequency. Static. Growing concerned, he made his way back to the office. He found the Sith Lord at the window, swaying like a reed in the wind. "Coruscant is beautiful this time of day," Palpatine said dreamily, staring into the nighttime cityscape. "Chancellor?" Anakin moved closer. Palpatine turned, smiling vacantly. Blood tracked from ears and nose in crimson tributaries. Anakin reached out with the Force and recoiled. The brain was hemorrhaging, neurons misfiring in cascading failure. Irreversible. The lightning hadn't just rearranged his face, it had cooked his brain. Palpatine turned back to the window, swaying through what might have been dance steps. "Can't touch this," he sang, voice cracking. "Can't touch this." The same two lines, over and over. "Chancellor," Anakin tried, voice low. No response, only another broken refrain. Anakin reached deeper into the Sith's mind through the Force, searching for clarity, and found only static, fragments, emptiness. There was no reaching him. Relying on Palpatine to protect his wife? Impossible now. Ask him about saving Padme, and he'd probably ask what a Padme was. But wait, his original plan, the one derailed when the Council denied him Master, scouring the restricted archives for forbidden techniques. That path had just reopened. The Jedi didn't know about his fall. Only two beings had witnessed his betrayal. One was somewhere on the streets below, courtesy of a long drop. The other... Anakin watched Palpatine stagger through what might have been a dance step, still mumbling, "Can't touch this." To the Order, he remained the loyal knight who had exposed Sidious. Windu had told Shaak Ti as much before leaving for this office. With Windu dead, and the Sith destroyed, who would deny him Master now? The restricted archives, all those forbidden texts on preventing death, were within reach. He could still save her. The visions flooded back, sequential and vivid. Yoda clubbing Master Senube with his Geimer stick until the old archivist stopped moving. Obi-Wan exchanging vows with a Tusken woman named Sandra in some desert ceremony. Padme screaming in childbirth. Dying, certainly. Why else would she scream during birth except impending death? He couldn't save everyone from his visions, but Padme, he would tear the galaxy apart before letting that future manifest. Life without her wasn't life at all. The only obstacle was Palpatine himself. Even brain-damaged, he remained dangerous. One lucid moment before the wrong audience could undo everything. And since Palpatine could no longer deliver on his promise to save Padme, Anakin felt only rage for the architect of the Clone Wars. The decision formed with brutal clarity. Palpatine of Naboo must die. As if sensing something, Palpatine focused on him. For half a second, Anakin hesitated, just long enough to wonder if there was anything left to salvage. Then Palpatine opened his mouth. "You want compromise? How's this? 20 years in the Senate. I wanted Naboo pearlfish. I compromised. I f***ed the radiator instead. I wanted to..." Mid-sentence, Anakin grabbed Palpatine by the skull and shoved him face first to the marble floor. Not gentle, but controlled enough to avoid obvious trauma marks. The Sith Lord rolled onto his back, gasping up at him. Anakin stomped down on his chest. He dropped to his knees beside the wheezing body, seized the oversized hood, and yanked it over Palpatine's face. All that theatrical fabric. Perfect. He pressed his mechanical hand down over the nose and mouth, then placed his flesh hand on top of it, palm over metal. Using his full weight, rage, and force-enhanced strength, he drove down. Palpatine's body bucked, fingers clawed marble, drawing blood from broken nails. The muffled sounds grew desperate. Anakin only pressed harder. The thrashing slowed, weakened, stopped. He held for another 30 seconds, counting them out. The body beneath him had gone from Sith Lord to corpse. Then he contacted Shaak Ti, the only council member left alive on Coruscant. Shaak Ti arrived within minutes to find Anakin standing amid the carnage. "Master T," Anakin gestured at the bodies. "They were like this when I got here." Shaak Ti surveyed the scene. Dead Jedi Masters, Palpatine's corpse, evidence of violent confrontation scattered across marble. She reassured Anakin, then moved to call in reinforcements. Not clones, never clones. Instead, she called Captain Griffin of the Coruscant Security Force. The CSF, Coruscant's police, bought and paid for by the Order, would ensure that Jedi alone dictated the narrative, a necessity with half the Senate still loyal to Palpatine. Anakin allowed himself a small smile. All was proceeding as planned. The CSF wouldn't investigate. They would simply affirm whatever story T presented. The medical examiner's report would later confirm severe cerebral hemorrhaging from electrical trauma, with death occurring when the victim's theatrical hood obstructed his airways during seizure. With the office surveillance conveniently offline during the incident, closing the investigation was all the easier. The CSF's media liaisons saturated every HoloNet channel with their narrative. Palpatine, revealed as a Sith cultist, had attacked Jedi Masters who'd arrived to negotiate the return of emergency powers after Grievous's death. The 20 kilos of spice found in his desk drawers suggested substance-induced psychosis. The peaceful Jedi delegation, the story went, had been murdered by a chancellor, whose mind had dissolved into chemical paranoia before his own unnatural abilities turned against him. Electrical discharge, triggering the cerebral hemorrhage that killed him. The incoherent military orders, transmitted moments before his death, only reinforced claims of acute intoxication. With a third of the council dead and the rest scattered across the outer rim, Shaak Ti alone bore its voice. On her word, Anakin was raised to master within a single standard day. His first act was to enter the restricted archives, desperately searching for anything that might prevent death. Meanwhile, Padme used the political vacuum to her advantage. Several contenders for the chancellorship died under mysterious circumstances. Others received packages containing holos that convinced them to withdraw from consideration. When Anakin said he was too busy to help, buried in ancient Sith and Jedi texts about immortality, she rolled her eyes. "I'm trying to save you," he insisted. "I've seen your death in my dreams." "It's just a dream, Anakin," she replied. The argument escalated from there. Anakin accused the Senate of incompetence. Padme countered that the Jedi couldn't find a Sith Lord sitting 5 meters from them for 13 years. He brought up the taxation crisis. She brought up the youngling recruitment policies. The call devolved into simultaneous shouting about agricultural subsidies and meditation requirements. "Don't worry," Padme finally snarled. "If I die, I've already arranged to have you killed and buried with me." She terminated the connection. Anakin stared at the blank holoprojector, slightly uncertain whether she'd been serious. Chancellor Amidala delivered the twins in a top-tier medical facility on Coruscant, surviving easily, and from the bed, she shot Anakin a pointed look. "All that fuss," she said, gesturing at the array of Force artifacts cluttering the delivery room. Jedi healing crystals, a Dathomirian protection ward, alchemical fire burning in its ceremonial vessel. Around her neck hung a heavy Sith amulet he'd insisted she wear. The medical staff pressed themselves against the walls, too terrified to tell him to extinguish open flames near oxygen equipment. "The artifacts must have saved you. The visions were specific," Anakin insisted, raising the Sith staff in his right hand as though the relic itself could prove him right. "You were screaming, 'That's called labor,'" Padme snapped. The argument escalated. Anakin accused her of dismissing prophetic dreams. Padme countered that he'd turned her delivery room into an occult museum. He brought up Senate corruption. She fired back about Jedi incompetence. The nurses exchanged glances and quietly evacuated the newborns as their parents shouted over the alchemical fire, out of which strange noises began to rise until they screamed at it to shut the fuck up. Within hours, the twins were shipped to Solanaberi on Naboo. Dorme and 2 of Padme's security detail made the delivery personally, carrying the infants onto the transport, while their parents continued their argument 3 floors up. Parenting required time neither Anakin nor Padme possessed, especially when they couldn't stop arguing long enough to notice their children had left the planet. Over the following years, Padme maneuvered herself into lifetime chancellorship through calculated eliminations and selective blackmail. Anakin assumed the title of Grand Master after Yoda's forced retirement. The ancient master's agricultural operations, staffed by Wookiees under promises of paths to paradise, had been mysteriously exposed to the HoloNet. The Jedi never identified the leak. With the galaxy firmly in their grasp, the next step toward their eternal empire revealed itself in the restricted archives. The Scepter of Ragnos, an ancient Sith weapon long abandoned there, siphoned energy from sacred sites and infused it into the non-sensitive, granting permanent connection to the Force. Anakin's retrieval method proved remarkably simple. The trick, he explained, was to grab things and walk out like you owned them. The high-visibility vest and clipboard added authenticity. Ahsoka, similarly equipped, carried 3 other artifacts behind him. No one questioned 2 people in safety vests with clipboards. Universal truth of bureaucracy. With the scepter in their possession, Padme soon gained access to the Force. Together, her newfound sensitivity, his unrestricted archive access, they translated the Korriban texts on cellular manipulation. Having claimed both Republic and Order, immortality became their next step toward an eternal empire. Between the artifacts and the Korriban script, the formula emerged. Thousands of lives, properly channeled, could extend cellular cohesion. Conservative calculations spoke of 1,000 years for 5,000 sacrifices, though other texts hinted at far greater yields if the energy was gathered in bulk. The mathematics proved slippery, but the core requirement remained constant. Vast numbers of life forces could be bent into centuries, even millennia, for each. Anakin easily secured the artifacts. For the lives, they decided to do the Naboo taxpayers a favor. The Theed Maximum Security Complex held over 6,000 inmates, beings who had long since forfeited their social contracts. At last, they could contribute something useful. From there, the plan settled into place. They'd wondered why other Jedi ignored such methods. Apparently, the Order clung to ancient promises of perpetual enlightenment after death, infinite understanding, boundless euphoria, every sensation amplified beyond comprehension. Like being on premium Nar Shaddaa Emerald that never diminished. Why bother with cellular immortality when eternal bliss supposedly waited? But Anakin remained unconvinced. Unlike most Jedi who spent their days partying and snorting everything from spice to motor oil, he and Padme had conquered too much in this reality to simply dissolve after a few decades. And beneath it all, he still carried the sting of her dismissing his rituals to save her as dramatic nonsense. He'd make her eat those words. 3 days later, everything was in place. They positioned their cloaked vessel above the maximum security complex. The ritual began. Using several artifacts in conjunction, they pulled the life forces from everyone below. Over 6,000 inmates, 300 staff, all channeled upward into their cells. Once complete, they dropped bombs on the facility and flew away. By morning, investigators blamed a generator explosion. With the Chancellor's personal attention, the case closed within hours. The entire site sealed under radiation containment. That afternoon, Padme stood before the Senate, condemning the corruption that had let such infrastructure rot. Her voice even broke as she spoke of inmates who deserved second chances and personnel who'd served faithfully. The ritual's completion granted them each 2 millennia minimum, assuming their calculations held, time enough to discover additional methods before expiration loomed. Days later, overlooking their soon-to-be eternal empire from the Chancellor's office, Anakin finally delivered the line he'd been saving. "Remember when you called Force rituals dramatic nonsense? Yeah. Who's the idiot now, Padme? Who?" He kept his tone meticulously neutral. Padme sat speechless for 30 seconds. Then she threw a Jogan fruit at his head. 15 years after Palpatine's death, when sufficient power had been accumulated and no opposition remained in Senate or Order, they remembered their offspring existed. The twins had met them sporadically over the years. Awkward holocalls on birthdays, credits transferred through intermediaries. At 15, when they could hold actual conversations, Anakin and Padme decided to reclaim parenthood. Nothing else left to conquer, really. They arrived on Naboo, exchanging pleasantries with Sola at the estate entrance. Hollow words about the weather, the gardens, how much the twins had grown. First time they'd seen their children in person since birth. When they finally sat alone with the twins in the sunlit atrium of Sola's villa, Leia raised her hand before they could speak. She addressed them as her progenitors. Deadbeat tyrants, she called them. Galactic parasites, war criminals masquerading as salvation. Everything wrong with civilization condensed into 2 people. They'd betrayed every principle Naboo held sacred. Service, dignity, democratic governance. They'd corrupted the Republic's founding ideals. They embodied everything decent beings stood against. The delivery showcased her political aptitude, perfect cadence, devastating precision, each accusation building on the last. Naboo's education system excelled at identifying strengths rather than demanding universal competence. Literary genius wasn't branded failure for struggling with plasma field equations, just as mathematical brilliance wasn't condemned for poor poetry. The system had recognized what she was and cultivated it. I never wish to see either of you again. She pushed back her chair and strode across the atrium, heading for the exit. Throughout her entire condemnation, her progenitors just sat in silence, no anger, no defense. They knew every word before she spoke it, expected it, seen it. "We love you too, Leia Amidala Skywalker," Padme called after her. Leia stopped. She turned slightly toward Luke, her expression conveying a single message. "They think they own us." Luke caught her glance but remained still. He understood what his parents had done, what systems they bent and broke, but those truths didn't cut him as they cut Leia. Forgiveness came easily to him, perhaps too easily, and anger always felt like wasted effort. In their rare calls over the years, Chancellor and General had sounded polite, even kind. He had no scars from them, only distance. Seeing them here, in person for the first time, was surreal more than anything. Leia cared for the institutions they had twisted. Luke simply did not. Leia broke her gaze and kept walking. She knew he would not follow. Luke watched her leave, then turned back to find both halves of his bloodline regarding him. "Let's hear your speech then, Luke," Anakin said. "Oh, I don't have one prepared." Luke adjusted in his chair, uneasy. "Leia and I don't exactly share the same expertise." "Really?" Anakin asked, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "So what is your area of expertise?" "Engineering," Luke said. "That's where the aptitude tests placed me." Anakin's face lit up. "Oh, I'm something of an engineer myself." "I scored high in engineering as well," Padme said to Anakin, a slight competitive edge in her voice. Then she turned her eyes back to Luke, though politics was my primary placement. Luke smiled. Silence lingered before he spoke. "Leia's just angry. She didn't really mean all that." The Jedi and the public servant shared a glance before the Chancellor spoke, her voice carrying a trace of sadness. "We hope so, Luke. It's a terrible thing, having children who hate you. We were only hoping for a chance to speak with you both." Luke had no answer, only the faint sting of guilt before the conversation shifted. Questions about his projects, which speeders he preferred, safe topics that slowly dissolved the tension. His shoulders eased. "Luke, we'd appreciate it if you stayed with us for a few days," the Grand Master eventually proposed, tone suggesting remorse. "We're so sorry we weren't in your lives before. We should have been. There's no excuse, but we want to make it right. We'd love nothing more than for you to come with us to the capital. We'll bring you back soon." He glanced toward Chancellor as he said it. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, warm on the surface. "Oh," Luke said, struck by the sudden change in topic. He found himself glancing back to where Leia had gone, a reflex more than a choice. "Luke?" Padme called. He turned from the exit back to them. "Yes?" The response came automatically. "Will you join us, son?" An excuse emerged weakly. "I don't know if Sola," the name caught, forced past the word he usually used, "would be okay with me leaving right now, Chancellor." He'd always called her Chancellor, him General, the titles everyone used on the Holonet broadcasts he'd watched since his days as a toddler. During their sporadic holocalls, he took to addressing them by the same titles. Leia had too, at least until she stopped answering their calls 5 years ago. In their limited interactions, the Chancellor and General had done nothing to suggest he should call them anything else. "Your aunt is fine with it." Padme destroyed his excuse immediately. "We discussed everything with her this morning," Anakin added. "It's your decision, Luke." Padme's tone suggested infinite patience. "We won't force you." "Completely up to you," Anakin mirrored her cadence. They had always known how it would play out. Leia would spit venom directly at their faces, while Luke would crumble at the first polite request. An inherent kindness, like that of his grandmother Shmi, who would occasionally shoot the Tuskens she'd set ablaze to end their suffering quicker. "Then, yeah, sure." The words emerged exactly as they'd predicted. Uncertain agreement, masquerading as willing participation. "Great, we'll leave now." Anakin rose. "Really? Now?" The surprise carried an edge of dawning comprehension. This was actually happening. They moved to flank his chair, their positioning making it clear They expected him to rise. Yes, now, Luke. Padme's tone remained pleasant. We're already delayed. If we stay longer, the media will catch wind of our presence. They stood beside his chair, waiting. The pressure of their expectation worked better than any command. What about Leia? Luke glanced back at the exit as he stood. Another look at that escape route. Let's give her time to compose another speech. Padme's hand found his shoulder as they began walking. Luke caught between them. What about Sola? Luke asked. Shouldn't we tell her first? She'll understand, Padme said smoothly. We can call her once we're on Coruscant. She won't mind. She led them into a narrow service corridor, one of the exits few others ever used. Then, as if to soften the weight of it, Anakin gestured at the dim passage. Is this how you used to sneak out during your time as queen? Oh, don't remind me, Padme said. The media was relentless. I couldn't step through the front door without being swarmed by drones. She turned to Luke. Did you ever sneak out this way? Or were you better behaved than I was? No. Luke's reply came fractured, his mind still trying to process how he'd gone from sitting in a chair to being shepherded through hidden corridors. Within minutes, they had him aboard their official transport, Naboo shrinking beneath them. Luke sat perfectly calm, not yet processing that he'd been maneuvered into something closer to abduction than invitation. We'll bring you back soon, they had promised in those first weeks on Coruscant, but soon stretched into months. Luke grew accustomed to their presence, and despite himself, came to welcome it. Anakin and Padme, for their part, had foreseen as much. They had counted on his affection and were quietly gratified when it arrived. Luke stayed in touch with everyone on Naboo, yet the bond with Anakin and Padme deepened until he no longer wished to return, though he would not have admitted as much. They had only one rule for him: he could not leave Coruscant without them. The overprotectiveness was plain. And despite the closeness, he addressed them only as General and Chancellor. After 15 years of calling them by titles, anything else felt weird, apparently. Master Yoda, meanwhile, died in his sleep, surrounded by Jedi, who had quietly replaced his oxygen feed with spice vapor.